not going to be perfect. But you're trying to be pleasing. Nowhere in there does God ask you to be perfect as a mom. And some of you may have had that kind of a household growing up where things just weren't perfect. And mom wasn't perfect. And that's okay. She's still called. She's still your mom. Mary understood where she was at. She understood when God called her, because in Luke 1:48 she says, "For he has looked on the humble estate of his servant." And she says, and then from now on, all generations, generation to generation, will be blessed. She understood where she come from. And she understands that she's not this perfect person. She's not this royalty that this King of Kings should be born into, but she accepts it anyway. And so many parents are beating themselves up because, listen, we've made some mistakes along the way. Moms here maybe feel like, man, I may have messed up. I wish I could go back and do it all over again. I had this conversation earlier this week, and it was just so timely in preparing this, in that, listen, it don't matter. You made some mistakes. You can't go back and get yesterday. You're not guaranteed a tomorrow. Where you got? What do you got left? You got today. Today, be the best mom that you can be. Be the best grandmother you can be. Be that best godly woman that you can be. Maybe you're here today and you think, listen, I'm none of those. I'm not a mentor. I'm not a mom. I'm not a grandmother. I'm not any of that. I'm not a caregiver. What am I? Maybe you're desiring to be that wife. You're desiring to be that mom one day. It's time to start getting ready today. Before I met Angie, I went to the Lord and I said, Lord, listen, you know me. You know my heart. There's work to be done here. And I know you're going to deliver a godly woman to me. But I've got to be ready to receive that. Work on me. And shortly after that, I'm in a small group, and across the room, there she is. And she's dressed in white. I'm like, wow, she's even in angel clothes today. This is so cool. Now don't look at her, because I told her I wouldn't talk all that much about her today. Gotta talk a little. You are a mom. Anybody know Ben Carson?
Yes.
One of the greatest surgeons of our time, right? And if you know anything about him, you know his life story. You know the story of his mom, a single mom, very, very poor, didn't have, working to just raise up her kids and to make them better than who she was. Didn't use the excuse of poverty. Didn't use the excuse that there's no guy around to help support and raise up. And so she did everything she could do to raise up her kids. And so one of the things she did was every 2 weeks, those kids had to deliver a book report to her. Do you remember book reports from school? Like you had to read the book, and then you had to write out a paper and title the book and author and what was the theme and the characters, and write a little story about the book. And every couple of weeks, her kids would have to turn in a book report to her, to their mom. This wasn't school. This was outside of school. You read books. She wants to keep her kids out of trouble. She wants to keep those minds going. They turned in a book report every couple of weeks to her. It was later in his life that Ben Carson found out his mom never even knew how to read. It didn't stop her. Just bring them to me. She wanted them to be better than her. There's a lot of good things, a lot of things listen, you're not perfect. Sometimes we put that on ourselves to be perfect. We measure ourselves against other people and people in church, and I did that for a long time too. Like, how come I'm not like so-and-so? And well, when you think about it, no one really comes here and goes, today I was a wreck. Today I said this to my wife and my kids. Everybody puts on the good front, and yet we compare ourselves to everybody else, right? We're not perfect, but we're trying to be pleasing to the Lord. Proverbs 31 talks a lot about great, godly things of a woman. It talks about how the woman is of great value, and the women are of great value. Would we agree with that, Trinity Church?
Yes.
It talks about that they bring goodness to a home. And they absolutely bring goodness to a home. And she works with her hands. She prepares food. Lynn, do you recognize that she prepares food sometime? And it's probably better than what we do. I remember early on, Angie really, she didn't feel like that was maybe an area that she was super, super great at. But she worked at it, worked with her hands. She worked at it. She cooks really, really great now. I got weight to lose. She cooks really well. Now with that, like you said, well, maybe you got the husband goggles on, or maybe the kids got their goggles on, but that's just how God works, right? As He's forming those children into, maybe the Lord just gives me this appetite, and her food is like nobody else's food. And when we go to a restaurant, and she goes, well, how is that? How does that lasagna, or how does that food taste? And I'm like, it's okay. It's not like yours. It's not like yours. They can cook, can't they? Mom, do I have permission to share a story? Sure. Okay. Got to drag you into this too. I'm doing a Mother's Day message in front of my mom and my wife, the mother of my children. This is challenging for me. I remember when we were younger, it was Christmas Eve, talking about lasagna. And she was cooking up a meal for everybody. And all the relatives are coming over, and they all come over. And she's just crying hysterically. And they can't calm her down. And they're looking around the room, and they're noticing one person's missing. I'm missing. And immediately they all thought I was dead. They all thought I died on Christmas Eve. And when they finally calmed her down, they're like, what's wrong? And she's like, I dropped the lasagna on the kitchen floor. She wrecked the lasagna. Cooking matters that much to that woman, doesn't it? I want to make sure that they're taking care of the house and that they're taking care of everybody well. It was good lasagna too, I might add. Not the one on the floor. They're a good steward. They're shrewd. They work long hours. They're constantly working. Would you just sit down for a minute and relax? But they're constantly working, constantly doing little things. She makes linens and coverings for the bed. She brings respect to the name of her husband. Angie brings respect to my name. I'm telling you, like if ever like I'm stuck, like I'm applying for a place to work or something, and I'm like, you got to meet Angie. I got to call in the backup here, right? Now you guys heard me preach and you got to know me, but I believe long before you got to know me in this church, you got to know her, and she brought a good name. I started to see the Lord work in her. And she has strength and dignity and wisdom, and she gives guidance. The godly woman gives guidance, helps people and grows them. Maybe you're past raising up kids and you think, man, my role as a mom is over, and it just isn't. You have an opportunity to pour in, and maybe our church isn't filled with kids all over. Where can you find where you can just pour in to those moms and raise them up? And she watches over her household and does not eat of the bread of idleness. She's just not idleness. This playground, they say, of the evil one, right? You're going to let it be idle, this house. And she brings praise and blessings to her home. The song. Our house is a house of song. And, you come over and you will hear song in our house. You will hear instruments. There might be some moves even in our house. And I believe that comes from Angie. The Lord being her calling as a mom and what she would do in this household and raise it up. I've been blessed. I don't know, how about you guys? And I'm not just speaking to guys, women, young people, young adults here. Have you been blessed by a mom in your life? I've had blessing upon blessing. Most people, listen, if they have one good example in their life, godly example of a mother, they're blessed. I've had multiple. I first was raised in a godly home by my mom. I remember just talking at school, always talking about my mom. None of the other kids are talking about their mom. And I'm like, well, maybe they should just have my mom. As a mom, she was an amazing mom growing up. All of the things. Now, I can't talk about those here because you know I'm an emotional guy. And she's sitting right there. And that was one household. And I got to witness that and experience that growing up. And then I met Angie's mom. And I saw another godly household. And here's a single mom working as hard as she could to raise up a godly daughter. And I got to experience that. In both of them, in times of trouble or times of when things weren't going right, you could just look to both of those moms, and there they are. Most often, if it's not in their hand, it's on their table. Open God's Word, and they're going to God with it. And then Angie comes along. And I get to firsthand experience her raising up our kids and just seeing what an amazing job she does. And all of the things that I'm not and that she is. I'm so glad that they have her. Listen, I would never put my kids on the spot and ask who's their favorite. At least not while she's around. But I know they got a special place for their mom. They love her. There's things that she does that I could never do. She raised them up and homeschooled them and taught them and went a little deeper into that, where they were around her all the time, and her schooling and in the house chores and in the cooking and in the cleaning and all the things, raising them up, and I got to witness that. I've shared that story probably before, but there's some newer folks, so I'll share it again. When they were 3 years old, we just moved into our house, I pulled up. Now listen, from my mom, I got safety and security. And so I'm always Mr. Protective. I'm always Mr. Safety. If I had my way, my kids would have been sitting on a couch with homeschool with a book in their hand and a helmet on. They would have been safe. She let them be them, an adventure. And I come home from work, and it was the first day that I come home from work in our brand new house, and Molly's just swinging like crazy on the swing, and she's swinging up into the branches of the trees. And I get out of the car right away. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa! A little too high. Calm down. Like, Ange, when they hit branches, not cool. Next day I come home from work and I pull up and Molly's going again, and she's going. I'm like, wow, she looks pretty high, but she's not hitting the branches. And later that night I took out the garbage and I saw branches in the garbage. Angie cut down a tree. Let them be kids. They wouldn't have gotten that from me. Listen, it's a calling, and there's not pleasing, but, not perfect, but they're pleasing to the Lord. Amen? And that's what they're striving for, is to be pleasing to the Lord. And then lastly here, once a mom, always a mom here on this earth. You don't lose that title. They grow up, they move on. Whether you talk to them, don't talk to them, you're their mom. You don't just get a little tag that you get to take off at a certain point. No one ever throws a retirement party for the moms. Well, we can start that tradition. There's no pension program or 401k for moms. They don't get to ride off into the sunset. Moms, they're constantly moms. And just when they think maybe about taking off that tag, here come those older kids. Mom, I need you. What do you got? Here come the grandkids. Mom, grandma. They don't get to retire from it. They're always a mom. And this is a picture that I see even here with Mary. And Mary was there for Jesus. Before he come into this world, she was already committed to that. And she was there for the birth, and she was there for his childhood and dedication, and she was there watching him grow up in this life. She was there when everybody else was against him. How would you like to be a mom and know that every town that he goes into, people are upset and people want to take his life. And there's Mary alongside. Mary, the first miracle that Jesus performs, right, or does, or creates, right, is Mary. We're at this wedding and we're out of wine and it's this picture of joy. And do something. What does he call her? Woman. And that's a respectful word, woman, there. And he does that first miracle. Speaking of weddings, I'll try this joke. I was going to try and play it off like it happened. I won't. There's a mom talking to her son at a wedding, her little son. And she's explaining all about the wedding to him. And she says to him, do you know how many wives that each man gets? And she was expecting one, and he says, 16. And she said, 16? Where do you get this? And he says, well, you just got to do the math, Mom. 4 better, 4 worse, 4 richer, 4 poor. 16 wives, Mom. All right. I'm good. Carry on, folks. You just get it? Did that just kick in?
No, I'm wondering still.
Oh my goodness.
Tough crowd. Tough crowd.
Mary was there for it all. Mary was at the cross. And you think about that. You know that he's your son that you've raised up, but you know he's your Lord. And you watch that. It says in John chapter 19, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister. She watches her son go through that. She keeps her calm. Always a mom. And Jesus, loving her so much, sees the disciple standing next to her and he says, Mom, this is your son. John, this is